अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मेरा नाम शहनाज एजाजुद्दीन है और मेरे साथ बैठी हैं ताहिरा नकवी. And since the book is in English, I guess I should switch to that and tell you that Tahira Naqvi is a clinical professor of Urdu language and literature at NYU and is a translator, writer, and painter. She has published extensive translations of the work of Urdu writer Ismat Chughtai, also fiction by Saadat Hassan Manto, Hajira Masroor, and Hajira Masroor, amongst others. She is the author of 2 collections of short stories, Athar of Roses and Other Stories of Pakistan, and Dying in a Strange Country. Her first novel, The History Teacher, will be published this year by Speaking Tiger Books. A self-taught artist, she regards her work as memoir chapters. And here's the book, The Monkey's Wound, which is the translation of Hajira Masroor, who's an Urdu writer, her short stories. And it's a wonderful, first of all, congratulations, Tahira.
Thank you.
For such a brilliant translation.
Thank you so
And
much.
for getting to the essence of the stories. I was very impressed. So just tell us about Hajira Masroor, first of all.
So can I borrow the book
Yeah.
for a second? So Hajira Masroor is the sister of very famous Pakistani writer Hajira Masroor, and they also had a brother whose name was Khalid Ahmed. And all 3 of them began writing in pre-partition India. They grew up and they were old enough to start reading and writing. And they were the mother as well, they were all prolific writers. And Khadija Masroor is the older sister, Hajira Masroor was younger. And during that time, she produced 3 or 4 collections of short stories. What is interesting is that Khadija Masroor and Hajira Masroor are often referred to as the Pakistani Bronte sisters, which I believe is due to the fact that they were 2 sisters and they were both writing and they were both very popular, and that they also had a brother, because that's the Bronte family. However, I would like to refer to her at this point as the forgotten Pakistani sisters, because very few of us remember who they were, what they wrote. As we come into the 21st century of Urdu writing in Pakistan, there's a tremendous amount of work being done. There's a lot of writing that goes on, a lot of fiction, short stories, poetry. There is no dearth of it. However, we need to, as we have often discussed with my sister who's sitting here and my daughter-in-law who is in America, that there is a need for collective memory to be recalled. We need to remember what we have left behind or what others have done for us. And literature especially is a great way to reconnect with the past. And so I decided to drag out these stories that I had started translating a while back. And you know, with a little spit and polish, I sent them out to various people, and Penguin India picked it up. Sadly, because of trade restraints between India and Pakistan, these books are not available here. And sooner or later, I'm hoping that they are actually available on Amazon, and I'm hoping that sooner or later some publishing house here in this country will pick it up for a reprint. You know, there's always hope. And
you might be speaking too soon. They might be tempted to pirate it. So
I don't think Penguin will allow that, but I personally wouldn't mind at all if that happens. So,
okay, and I just want to ask you about your intikhab or your selection, because this is a selection of her stories. So what made you select these particular ones, and especially the title, which is so intriguing, The Monkey's Wound?
Right. So the monkey's wound is a translation of the title Bandar Ka Ghao. And these stories particularly are from collections called Charke and Bandar Ka Ghao and some others. There is an interesting, when you read all of the stories that Hajira wrote, you find that the stories that she writes after partition, after coming back to Pakistan, have a slightly different flavor and temperament than the ones that she wrote and published in India before partition. So one asks that question, one wonders why that was the case. And a lot of people have come up with different ideas. One person said, a critic said that she became a more mature writer when she was in Pakistan, and that's of course not entirely true because she was already a mature writer and she had already published 3 or 4 collections of short stories. I believe that it had a lot to do with the environment in which these new arrivals from India found themselves after partition. And it was that sadly, the spirit of diversity and the openness that they had during that time in India with the progressive writers movement and the kind of things that they were doing with fiction was something that was not welcomed in the quote-unquote new Pakistan. Because they were on a different path and they were looking to do different things. Of course, we wanted to be an Islamic republic. So a lot of writing that dealt very openly and frankly with issues like women's feelings or women's sexuality or women's lives were sort of discouraged. The same thing happened with Manto, as we all know. You know, Manto went crazy and then he became an alcoholic, and then he died after he started writing about partition in Pakistan. And it was one case after another on his work. And so I think that she became more cautious.
Did she have experience difficulty with the law as well? I mean, were there any injunctions against her, or did she have that kind of?
Right. So when she started, she and her sister started writing here. There was this very famous poet and writer and journalist called Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi. You may have heard of him. He was their mentor. He was their very close family friend. And so he guided them and he worked with them. And they became, she and Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi were co-editors of the very famous journal Nuqush. And then they made the mistake of publishing a story called Kholdo by Manto. And all hell broke loose, of course, and they were actually thrown out, more or less, from their duties, and they were asked to leave. And after that, the atmosphere became more and more constrained. And it was difficult for her, and she also began to face all kinds of criticism from different quarters. They were also communists, don't forget that. They belonged to the Communist Party. And there was all that other stuff happening there which had to do with politics at that time in the new Pakistan. And so she had to suffer a lot of indignities. The cartoons were made based on her sister and her relationship with Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi, and things were written about them. And so there was a period of disillusionment that followed when a lot of them, not just her, came to Pakistan and tried to make adjustments. They were all carrying the legacy of what they were doing before they came.
Absolutely.
You know, so it was difficult to just make a complete break.
And in the stories themselves, I mean, they're not happy stories at all. Beautifully written and beautifully translated by you. So these stories were written before partition, as I understand.
Yes.
But
except, there are a couple. For example, Tisri Manzil, that is about Karachi, and then there is another one about Vaga camp. Okay. So what I've done is I've taken stories from the earlier collections, And then I've included stories that she wrote later on, which were post-partition. And so the collection covers a long period.
Okay.
In that sense, it's comprehensive. It sort of takes into account all of the different kinds of things that she was dealing with.
So what was your sense of her stories after partition as compared to the ones before?
Right. So after partition, the stories seem more tempered. They are not as open, they're not as frank in their approach to women's lives. She didn't talk so much about women as she did about the new nation.
Right.
So this particular one, this deceased nation, is about her visit to Vaga camp, where they were these freshly arriving
would you read something from
yes.
it?
So I think that, so this was one, and then Tisri Manzil is about Karachi, which is a really detailed account of residents of a building where there are different immigrants, different people who have arrived from India, and there are Christians, and there is a Hindu, and there are Muslims, and so that becomes like a microcosm of the new Pakistan and the struggles that they had to undergo.
Absolutely.
And so, but anyway, if you permit me, I will read some portions of the deceased nation.
Okay.
Shaini had just returned from Walton camp. A gauzy curtain of a light orange hue fluttered on the open window, sluggishly clinging like a weary female snake emerging from its old skin. Sunk into a dark orange sofa, Shaini was staring vacantly at the red gate beyond the window outside, which became visible each time the curtain moved. The red gate, covered with a vine laden with bunches of red flowers, where Colonel Kaleem had dropped her off moments ago. So this is the introduction to her arrival in Lahore from Delhi. And I'm just going to skip to the part where she is at the camp. So they're from Lucknow, and of course this is Lahore. Oof, Punjabis everywhere, or Sindhis. In the coffee house, at Chathar Manzil, in Banarsi Bagh and on the Mall Road, there was no escaping them. Majas, Sajas, and then their extremely spoilt women. Lahore appeared like a fool in the cultivated evenings of Lucknow. I couldn't stand it.
Okay. Hasn't changed since then at all. But I was told that we have 10 minutes left, so would you rather
I'm just
continue?
going to read like 2 lines from where the actual actually.
I think read a little more about Lahore,
Yes.
since you're
This
here.
is actually Lahore. Waving about hands and feet as red as pieces of meat, crying naked babies, babies covered in filth and flies, babies squeezing their mothers' breasts, new mothers moaning in pain, ugly, frail and naked, soiled clothes, soiled bed linen, and women feeling embarrassed. Shaini's head began to swim. She quickly came out into the veranda. These empty, innocent, and bewildered looks of life, the new gasps, seemed to be wrapping themselves around her. She felt a strange kind of stirring and tickling, and she felt that a baby, unlike all these babies, a baby as beautiful as a boy doll, was clutching at her breast. She wanted to cast off this tiny burden from her chest and think of something that is Pakistan's new generation, ill-fated generation, alas, freedom, what sorrow, partition. But who cares?
So this is, of course, an account of the refugee camps. And it's beautifully, beautifully translated. We just have very few minutes in which, if somebody wants to ask Tahira, the gentleman here.
Jesus.
I think एक mic है आपके पास? Or if you could just come here and speak.
No, they have a mic.
Do you have a
Can you hear me? Thank you very much for translating these stories, and they're all the more welcome because we hardly talk about the women writers all over the subcontinent, not just in Pakistan. I know you've written a substantial foreword to this book as well, so the only question I have is, she didn't write a lot when she came to Pakistan, Hajira Masroor. Have you been able to unearth why could she not write during the last 20, 30 years of her life? I mean,
No, I did some research. I spoke to her daughter, Naveed, who lives in Karachi. And I think that she was extremely disheartened by the early reception or the years that she spent here. And a lot of that appears, you must have read it, in articles that she wrote about her discontent and about the way that they were being treated. And I think that served as a sort of discouragement. Mostly, I think it was that. And sometimes, you know, the juices just stop flowing. That also happens. It was a terrible thing to do, you know.
When you relocate.
To come from, to migrate, to give everything up, and then to give up your intellectual heritage. I think that was the worst blow.
Anyone else? Well, yeah, Durdana.
Thank you. The last portion that you were reading about, you know, the women and the babies and all, it looked like I had read it somewhere, and I haven't read her. And then I realized that जो अभी हमारी floods आए हैं, exactly the same scenario.
Yes.
So sad. Nothing changed.
Yeah. No.
That's it.
Well, I think we just have 3 minutes left, Tahira. So I think, you know, just to give them a flavor of your book, if there's any other part that you'd like to read, I think that would be very welcome.
Something nicer and more pleasant, perhaps.
Okay.
So the third story, which is the Tisri Manzil, is a very interesting, it's a very long story, but it's really nice. And I'm sorry, I know these guys are getting ready to start. Oh, let's do Munni at the Karni, Munni Mele Mein. The quivering flame of the torch, the sounds of the drum beat and the notes of the harmonium, the crows in the trees in the large compound were caught in the branches and began to flutter noisily. Chun, chun, she jangled her anklet bells and sang, "Go away, O cruel one, I will not come with you." The words, once everyone heard them, caused much excitement. The drummer began to beat the drum vigorously, jumping up and down with the drum, tossing his head from side to side. The harmonium player's eyes and neck moved energetically in rhythm with his fingers, which were tapping over the keys. And as far as for the poor torchbearer, his job proved to be the hardest. The dancer moved so fast within the circle of the spectators after she had finished singing that the torchbearer had great difficulty keeping the light focused on her face. Also, he had to make sure that proximity to the flaming torch didn't pose a threat to her. Anyway, what was this torch but a nuisance? A bottle filled with gasoline and coated with a thick layer of clay, which the torchbearer turned upside down to soak every time the gasoline was depleted and the flame began to flicker. Munni Bibi, all bundled up in Kamal's lap, viewed the dancing, the twirling flame, and the twirling woman all through sleepy eyes. She had been dozing when Kamal suddenly picked her up from her bed and brought her out to watch this spectacle. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Do we have, how much time do we have?
I think we're done.
1 minute. Well, it's just 1 minute leaves me to thank you, Tahira, for presenting your book here. I think we've all learned a great deal within this very short time span that we were given.
I want to thank you, Shahnaz. Such short notice, we've been able to come up with a substantial
No,
conversation.
I think the
don't you
book
think?
kind of dictates it. I just wanted you to speak about the monkey's wound and why you selected that part. So if you would very quickly
So,
tell us.
yes, so you mean the story, or you mean the title,
The
or
story,
what
I
happened
mean,
with the title?
obviously the story impressed you.
The story was the Bandar ka ghao itself, the words, the term Bandar ka ghao is somewhat very telling. And there is a kind of a saying which has to do with the Bandar ka ghao, which once it starts, it never heals. So reference wo bhi hai in the story. And the story itself is very, very depressing about this woman, young woman, who has who has so many constraints from the family, from society, from other people, that if she finds it impossible to escape in any way, and eventually succumbs to loneliness and to tuberculosis. And she's just lying outside. And the way that she creates the picture of this young girl lying out in the veranda in the heat, suffering from a terrible fever, but not willing to go inside where the rest of the family is and sitting with them and talking and sharing their conversation, because she feels that she's being cast out.
Right.
So it's a very, very, and it's very well written, and you can see the difference between this story and some of the other stories that she has written later, because this was one of the earliest that she wrote.
And very quickly, were any of these autobiographical? Any story that struck you?
No, that's why she's compared to the Bronte sisters, because if you look at the lives of the Bronte sisters, you would be like, where is Heathcliff in their lives? Where is Jane Eyre? And they were three very simple young women who led very cloistered lives and who didn't have any adventure in their lives
With
at
vivid
all.
imaginations.
And so it was just their vivid imagination and things they came up. Of course, the sisters read a lot.
Right.
They read a lot. I'm sure they did too, and as did these sisters. So I think reading is an amazing thing, you know. for getting
Absolutely,
the
it transports
juices
you.
going. Yeah.
And it inspires
Yes,
you.
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming to this session. Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
A round
Thank
of
you so
applause
much.
for Tahira.
Thank you. Thank you.